Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Shaping Africa podcast. Today I'm joined by Peter Ngunyi, CEO of Early Bird Ventures. Peter, welcome to the show, and
Asante
feel free
sana.
to introduce yourself to the audience.
Nice to meet you, by the way.
Thank you.
I feel as if we share a lot of things. I am a farmer's kid. We can complete the introduction there.
Okay.
So my parents were working middle class when I grew up, and my mom quit her job to become a chicken farmer, and she became very successful. So my dad got FOMO. He quit his job to become a dairy farmer.
Interesting.
Cows are not like chicken. Cow and chicken, that was our family. And dairy farming is really difficult. You know, you wake up at 3 a.m., you have to build these things. Mm-hmm. You know, Kenya Power does its thing. So, you know, the machines, you can't use them. You milk by hand, you know. So my teenagehood came from like here to here, like zero. So when I could leave, I left for the US. Mm-hmm. And I was gone, kabisa, didn't want to come back. But I was lucky. I've been an operator for some companies. I've done growth strategy. I came back to the continent 8 years ago. Okay. Was an operator for a tech startup called Brick. Mm-hmm. It's one of the celebrity startups in Africa. We were putting Wi-Fi in matatus and having fun meeting Mark Zuckerberg, and pretty soon I decided to start Early Bird Venture Lab, which the idea there is just to back high-growing African tech startups, mostly African founders. Right. And we've done well. You know, pandemic happened, things started accelerating. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy to be back in Africa. Okay. So awesome. That's who I am.
So how does a farmer's kid end up in the US? What was that journey like?
It was interesting. So first of all, where I ended up in Kansas, and I left Nairobi. It was like 24 degrees. Everything was nice. I got there. It was minus 14. It was I was like, what is happening here? Right. I really, this was around the late 90s. I went there early 2000s. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Africa wasn't a place that teenagers wanted to stay. You know, and that's funny because I have an 18-year-old younger sister. A sister who's 18 years younger than me. Africa is where people want to stay, right? So like, it's kind of like I'm looking at her and I'm like, what happened? You know, so more times, I mean, recession was super high, opportunities were low, inflation was high. You had kind of like the big cases, Patni and Jirongo was printing money. I don't know whether that's true or not, just in case. But there was a lot of fake money, running around the economy. Right. It just wasn't a good time to be a teenager here. There were no jobs, so I think that's why I left.
Okay, yes. Okay. And how are your uni years? So did you complete in Kansas or?
Yeah, so my uni years were interesting because soon you realize, like, okay, like when we were growing up, we were watching Friends, and there are all these Hollywood movies. Then you show up to the Midwest, and you're like, okay, this is not LA and it's not New York. Right. So we suffered through that situation. Then I showed up to Austin, Texas, where it's the first time I felt as if I'm in a place where I can gel. Mm-hmm. There were young people who'd come from working with, like AOL and Hotmail, and they'd made, .com money. Right. And I'm like, this tech thing where you can make money really fast is a thing that I want to be in. So that's the first time I tapped into the energy of like early stage tech startups. Interesting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And did you find other like Kenyan companions who had like similar vision?
Yes. So actually, like how like I turbocharged my career path was meeting a gentleman named David Kobier, and he's kind of like he's the chairman. He's in Nigeria they would say Oga. He's the Oga. David Kobier was one of the early founders of the tech ecosystem in Africa. So they were working with Ushahidi, iHub, Brick, and every time he would come back from Africa, he would have won something new. I've won a Webby, or I'm humanitarian of the year by by MIT, or I'm a TED fellow, and I'm like, okay, what am I doing? I had breakfast, so that was my accomplishment.
Right.
Yeah. So pretty soon I was like, okay, I need, if you guys find a space for me, I need to be doing that. Another thing that's interesting when you work in the West is, like, you're paid well, but you move a company like Coca-Cola, Auto Trader, your work in the magnitude of the 100,000 people who work in the company, you're just a little cog in the wheel,
Totally.
right? But what we are doing in Africa right now, it's moving from, you move from 0 to 1 really quickly, right? Several of my investees, they're already YC companies, they've raised, tens of millions of dollars, and you're talking about a sprint of like 15 months.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And, I've been lucky to meet, like Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Case, Brian from Airbnb, and many, many other people. I would not meet those guys if I was sitting somewhere in, Philadelphia or Atlanta. Like,
Right,
you just don't, you're just a guy.
You're just a guy.
So.
But on the continent, you're the OG.
On the continent, you get to do work with some really interesting people, and the community is nice, and we support each other, especially like this community of African founders, of African investors, of people investing into the continent. There are not that many people. And actually another way of thinking about it is, like I am a historian, so they are like the men who build America. You have Rockefeller, Ford, JP Morgan, like you mentioned 5, and you're like, okay, those guys built the country, right? And you see the same thing as China. They are the first people who went to invest in like Alibaba, and and I'm like, okay, if that happened in America, if it happened in China, Southeast Asia, Latin America, it's coming to Africa, right?
Totally.
So how do we become the first people who kind of like put in $1 and got $1 million now? It's just kind of, and then you get to shape how, young people are thinking. You get to shape, even society, politics, in Kenya, it's called, bribery and, corruption. In the US, it's called lobbying, right? And it's all about positioning, right? So when Safaricom, for example, became the biggest taxpayer in Kenya, they actually are creating policies with government that move policy where you want policy to go, right? So it's fun. That's what we do. Yeah.